Hey folks, welcome to another episode of TWiP. I'm your host, Frederick Van Johnson. Today we're diving deep into the world of technology, photography, and innovation with a true Renaissance man, Mr. Nathan Myhrvold. From working with Stephen Hawking to becoming Microsoft's first CTO, and now pushing the boundaries of culinary science and extreme macro photography, Nathan's journey is just amazing. Hey folks, welcome back to another episode of This Week in Photo, also known as TWiP. I am your host, Frederick Van Johnson. This is, I say this all the time when I have these interviews, but Nathan and I, my guest today, and I were chatting in the green room before I hit the record button, and I was telling him he's got to be one of the most interesting people that I've ever read a bio for, because all the things that you heard in that intro, but all of those things I'm interested in, right? And so the challenge for this conversation is going to be keeping it focused and short, or we go for hours and hours. Nathan, welcome to the podcast, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm glad to be here.
No, it's good to have you. So we have a lot to talk about today. So, I want to get to the meat of the discussion, which is, part of the meat of the discussion, which is about the Snowflake Project. But before we do that, I gave a bit of a snippet of your bio in the intro, but give me an elevator ride length of who, Nathan, the real Nathan Myhrvold is.
Well, I spent a lot of my adult life doing things I first encountered as a kid. So when I was like 9 years old, I got a camera, a little plastic camera given as a gift to me by a relative. And that created this lifelong love of photography. I also discovered recipe books at the local library. I was fascinated I could learn how to cook from a book, not just from mom or grandma.
Yep.
And when I was 9, I decided I'd cook Thanksgiving dinner all by myself, and I did. Now, I also discovered when I was around that age, maybe a little earlier, I was really good at school, and I liked math, and I liked science. So I could have been a photographer, I could have been a cook, but I was really good at school, so I went on and ultimately got a PhD in physics, and I was a postdoctoral researcher with Stephen Hawking.
Wow.
Then I took a leave of absence from that. Originally, I thought it would just be for a few months to work on a software project, wound up starting a startup company, became the head of that company. 2 years later, we sold the company to Microsoft. I became Microsoft's first chief technology officer, and I was there for 14 years.
Wow. What was that 14-year window?
That was from 87 through, or 86 really, mid 86 through 1999.
So was that where you were there in the Windows 95, Windows 98,
oh, yeah.
that era?
Oh, I was a development manager on Windows 2.0.
Oh, wow.
So, well before 95.
Wow, look at that. Geez. So that's a whole nother discussion that we could have about that, because I was on the other side of the spectrum then. I was the guy installing it, right? On my machine with the multiple floppy disks at the time. Oh
yeah, we had with Windows 2, we had a little fold out thing you could put on your desk that would have labels for where you should put the floppies for when you had to swap them in and out so you wouldn't get confused.
Yeah.
It's insane that we tried to do all that stuff on software. Well, it's on a machine that is less smart than not just your computer, not just your watch, but probably than your battery charger. I know that sounds crazy, but in fact, there's a website that benchmarks computers to compare them to the Apollo space computers that was used to navigate to the moon. And they found that a common brand of USB charger on Amazon is actually about 500 times more processing power in it. It's got a little microprocessor. Than the original Apollo computer. 500 times to charge our USB.
And I've heard that.
Crazy.
I've heard that. That is crazy. And there's a ton of stuff I'm going to dive into. I want to get into the culinary stuff and the photography. But since I have you on the hot seat right now, I have to ask you this. So, because you brought it up. So this idea of like these older machines, like when I was in the Air Force, I was stationed at Vandenberg Air Force Base,
Yep.
now Vandenberg Space Force Base. And they used to, this was during the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty era,
Yep.
with Russia, where they could come and inspect our missile silos and count them and vice versa. And I remember I was a young photographer and went down into one of the missile silos with the delegation. I was the stand away, take pictures, that guy. And I remember the speech that the general was giving at the time. Is he a general or a colonel? But he was giving, and he said, those Palm Pilot things that everybody loves right now? This takes less processing power to launch one of these things than those do by an order of magnitude. And so I'm thinking, I go back to that moment and I fast forward to today and the gigabytes that even some of the more rudimentary applications take to run, and how much power we have in our watches and glasses now, in some cases. And I remember back to my Commodore 64. Remember those days?
Oh, yeah.
I remember writing or typing in code from the back of a Compute magazine to get a little stupid helicopter thing to run, right?
Yep.
And then, syntax error in line 5,000, you're right, all that. And so I'm thinking those games back then, I mean, by today's standards, they were caveman games, right? But they ran and they were pretty good and they were engaging in 64K, including the operating system, right? So why does it take so much horsepower these days with all the magic computers and CPUs and all this stuff we have?
Part of it is that it's almost free. Okay, so it turns out that the cheapest that you can make a processor, and this has been true for many, many years, is about $1. Mm-hmm. And that's because the packaging and the other things around it are about $1. That's what it costs. So you can't really get a 1 penny processor. You might be able to, but most of the market tends down to being $1. And the reason that USB charger has so much power isn't because it needs it. It's because they don't save any money by going to a smaller processor.
And but don't they save processing cycles, therefore battery life? And
not for a charger. Charger's plugged into the wall. You don't care about that.
It's free.
But fundamentally, the amount when computing gets to be so inexpensive, you wind up optimizing for other things. So one of the things you optimize for is anything that the customer wants, regardless of how frivolous. If the customer wants it, why not put it in? Another thing is the productivity of the programmers. Mm-hmm. So back in the day when we had 64K, people would program in something called a machine language. Mm-hmm. It was very labor intensive. You could do it. I did lots of it, actually. But it was very, very time consuming to do it. Mm-hmm. As programmers start getting higher and higher salaries and you need them for more and more things, you say, well, look, maybe I should do something that's simpler for the person, even though the machine is working harder, but the machine only costs $1, so I don't care how hard the machine works.
It's free. So you can get sloppier. Basically, you're like, you had to do more with less back then. Now it's an embarrassment of riches, and you can just be sloppy because you have a mansion, right?
That's right. But that's true in everything. In your car, almost everybody's car is massively more powerful than anything Henry Ford ever saw.
Right.
Okay. Do we need all that? Well, most people have a car. Well, almost everyone has a car that'll go over the speed limit. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. So in a strict sense, you would say you don't need more. But you want to because you tow something. You want to because it's fun. You want to because it's part of your image that you're you got a hot car, or a whole set of other reasons, right? So,
Yeah.
and if it's not too expensive to do, what the hell? You go ahead and the market will supply that.
Yeah.
So I used to say that software is like a gas. A gas will expand to fit whatever container you put it in. So you have a brand new computer that's massively faster than what you had before. Oh, don't worry. Software will use all that for something. And
Yeah.
it might be something you desperately want, and it might be something that you don't care about. But let's take Photoshop as an example. So photographers almost all use Photoshop or a similar program.
Yep.
The first version of Photoshop, I vividly remember, and it took forever to load an image, and those images were pathetic. They were a thumbnail by today's standards.
Yeah.
So initially, you needed all of the horsepower you could have to get Photoshop to work at all.
Mm-hmm.
And if this was 2 years ago, I'd say Photoshop's gotten pretty fast in most things, and you can use it on a laptop just fine. And then, like a year ago-ish, I don't know, Adobe came out with this new noise reduction thing. I don't know if you've tried it.
I have. Yeah, absolutely.
It's magic.
Yeah.
It's goddamn magic, okay? But it takes a long time to run.
Yeah.
It helps if your computer has a GPU, but it can still take minutes per picture. And so you're selective. Then you think, oh, gee, I can't really tell. I can't decide between these two versions. I better do them both, right? So I can really see what they look like. And all of a sudden, we're back in a thing where, before that feature came out, I had stopped thinking of Photoshop as being the most memory intensive or processor intensive program that I have.
Yeah.
Once I have that feature, man, I want it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Same with
valuable. I
audio.
want to use that. But it's that kind of a cycle has gone on forever. You have a machine. Someone has a very clever idea to implement a feature that you hadn't used before. So, okay, you start using that feature, and now suddenly you complain your hardware is too slow.
Yeah.
Another great one is HDR. I used to for taking a landscape picture in particular, you'd have to worry a lot about the dynamic range. How are you going to expose it? I had this whole set of these crazy filters, gradient filters that would be really dark at the top, and they would wash out, and so you could
like the
position
Koken?
those. Yeah, Koken and Stingray, and there was a couple of people that made, and they still make them, and you can still use them if you really want to, but I don't do that anymore. I do HDR.
Yeah.
Because HDR allows you to have lots of control over your dynamic range. And to do so after the fact, which is great, because while you're rushing and the sun is setting, messing with more shit doesn't help.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can't unbake the cake, right? To speak to your chef side of your brain, you want the ingredients to rebake that cake again in a different way, which is the raw data.
But what that means is I've gone from, hey, the digital is great. I take a picture, I see exactly what I've got, to when I take these HDR pictures, well, no, I see a whole bunch of stuff, and it's important to look at it, but I don't really know if I got what I wanted.
Yeah.
Right? And then I also do panoramas. So you do a panorama where you're stitching it together. Now I really don't know.
That's right. That's
and
right.
So, and then if the sun is going down, I just sit there doing it over and over again. Boom, boom, boom. Because it takes, a minute or two to take all the pictures, because I'm taking probably 7 pictures. And each one is probably a 5-shot HDR that time of night.
Yeah.
So I'm making a lot of frames, and I don't know at the time whether I got the picture again. So I'm all the way back to, it's almost like developing the film. I have to go and process it quite a bit just to see if I got it.
Yeah. Yeah, which is part of the fun, right? I mean, part of the whole, like when we were shooting back in the film days, the snapping of the shutter was only part of the equation. The real fun was in the dark room
Yep.
or, all that part. And I would argue it's still the same way. The real fun it's just on the computer now. It's in the computer and sussing out those details that tell the story that you saw when you snapped the photo. So Nathan, so why? On that same or that same vein, you built a camera.
Oh, I built lots of cameras by this stage.
But you built a very special camera for a very specific purpose.
Yep.
Can you tell me about that and why?
Well, so I've been fascinated with snowflakes. As a kid, you see a snowflake. I grew up in LA, so seeing a snowflake was like a very special, vacation. We went up to the mountains where there was snow and maybe we'd go skiing kind of thing. It was not natural to me, but it was fascinating. So I decided I want to take pictures of snowflakes. And this is after I'd gotten really into taking macro photography and super macros and photography through a microscope. Well, it turns out to take a picture of a snowflake that's good is really hard. You can't bring it inside because it'll melt. In fact, even before it melts, they'll usually evaporate. Which is weird. We don't think of ice evaporating, but that's what freeze drying is. That's what freezer burn is in your freezer. If you say, oh, you got freezer burn on meat, it's because you freeze dried it. It wasn't sealed enough. So anyway, what you have to do is build a microscope that you can take outside in the cold, and you have to stand outside in the cold and load it up with the things. And then you have to shoot at very high magnification. Okay, a snowflake is a really big snowflake, might be 3/8 of an inch. Usually they're more like a 1/4 inch and sometimes even smaller. Well, you put that and you shoot it at 1:1 and it's this little thing in the middle of the frame. If you want to shoot a really nice photo, you have to shoot it at at least 6 times magnification. And probably for a lot of them, 10 is better. So that's a pretty exotic optical setup to get that. And then you have to make sure the snowflake doesn't melt. So you have to cool everything. You can't
and
use
no fog or anything like from your breath.
Oh yeah, you could easily, if you breathe on the stuff, that's terrible because your breath but for the same reason that your breath condenses and you can see fog from your breath. If you breathe onto something, it will wind up getting freezing. Frost forms on it. You can't even bring your cameras inside if they're not wrapped up. Because you have a cold camera and you bring it inside. Well, inside, it's got more humidity than it was outside. And so frost will form all over your camera, and including inside your camera. So you have to seal it up, like in a Pelican case or something like that, and bring it in and let it slowly warm up over a period of hours. So anyway, it's a big trouble. And so I built a special purpose microscope just to take pictures of snowflakes.
That's incredible. So, and I have a good friend of mine he specializes in snowflake photography. You may have heard of him since you're in that world, Don Komarechka.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah. And
I've never met him, but I certainly know of him.
Oh, yeah. Check out. I've done a couple of interviews with him on the podcast that are in the archives. Just search for his name. And he, very different process, very similar kind of scientific kind of approach to photography and very meticulous and just, to a level that it makes my head hurt, which I'm sure you are not unfamiliar with. But he does it with traditional cameras, like micro four thirds in some cases. And with micro four thirds optics, with the macro lenses and extenders and all that stuff. Why would what's better about microscope than a traditional?
And besides Don, there's another really great snowflake photographer who lives in Russia. And I'm sorry, I can't pronounce it. I don't remember his name well enough. Plus, I couldn't have pronounced it correctly. But that guy, shoots handheld at fairly high magnification, And he's got one black wool mitten that he uses. He always is posing it on. You can't see that it's a mitten from the thing,
Sure.
but that's his thing. Now, Don and that guy both live in places that are really, really cold. Don's in Canada, this other guy's in Russia. So they have a lot of access to snowflakes. That's one thing. Yeah. So they get to go out a lot. I live in Seattle. It doesn't snow worth a damn here. And here's an interesting thing about snowflakes. You don't get pretty snowflakes if it's not really cold out. If you're in a place like Seattle, you get a very wet snow. The snowflakes have all clumped together, and they look terrible, and they dissipate very quickly. The best looking snowflakes are in a place that is at least 0 to -5 Fahrenheit. Really cold.
Yeah.
Even most ski resorts aren't that cold reliably when it's snowing. So I wind up going to Fairbanks, Alaska, or Yellowknife, Canada, or places like that to do this. There, you can find, if you live in a place, you might find, there's 10 days a year when it's like this. Yeah. I have to travel there, so that made me. Plus, I got into this and I decided, hey, let me try to build a really great snowflake microscope. This is just like anything else in photography. There are photographers who don't have shit for equipment who take better pictures than I do. Okay?
Yeah.
And I think that's true for everybody. Even for that guy, there's probably someone with shittier equipment that can sometimes take a better picture.
That's right. There's always a bigger fish.
Well, and it depends on the style of photography that you do. It depends on a variety of things. So Don takes great snowflake photos. There's half a dozen other people that are very serious and famous for it. And everyone has different equipment. I met one of these guys, a guy named Ken, who's a physics professor at Caltech. And he built a special snowflake microscope. And I met him before that's part of what got me interested in doing snowflakes is I met him at a conference. Yeah. And he's got a website called snowcrystals.com, I think. So he built a cool microscope. And it used equipment a little bit like some of the things I would use in a studio. This is my studio here behind me. So I started with that as my idea, but I wanted to go beyond that. And so I went in a very equipment-heavy direction. And a guy with a handheld camera and an old woolen mitten might take a better picture than me. Yeah. But the approach I decided to do was to have the best possible equipment, and I want to take the highest resolution snowflake in the world.
Which you did, and we'll have as best that we can represent it on the website. With that, I'm curious, being such a I don't know, Renaissance man seems, weird to say that, but multidisciplinary artisan. Let's use that. So being a multidisciplinary artisan, when you approach something like the snowflake photography, and doing the highest resolution and building the rig to get you there, what's most important in that journey? Is it the science side of it because you want to see if it can be done, or is it the art side of it? You want to create the best photograph, the most beautiful photograph of a snowflake ever taken? Well,
photography is both an art and a science. Yeah. And more so than I think almost any other kind of art. If you wanted to do figure drawing, any piece of paper and literally a chunk of charcoal is all you need. Yeah. And tons of talent, by the way. That and tons of talent. With photography, no matter who you are, you have to have a technological gizmo. And it was invented, more than a century ago. So our gizmos have gotten better and better over time. Today, we have the best cameras that Earth has ever had by a large margin.
Yeah. And yet, getting better.
Absolutely, they are. Does that mean that all photos are easy? No, it does not mean that. Yeah. And every time the equipment gets better, it enables a class of photograph that you couldn't get any other way. I do a lot of wildlife photography, and the ability to use high ISO, and so you can take pictures at dusk without having any extra lights. That's just amazing.
Yeah.
If I'm at ISO 5000, I think that's no big deal. ISO 5000 can look great.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would have killed for that ISO in the film days.
Oh
Right?
my God! No, it seems like a bad joke. If you used ISO 800, you were getting these crazy, grainy, horrible things.
Jigsaw puzzles.
But hey, that enables a kind of photo. And does that mean that photo is more or less noble than another kind? No, but it's a kind of photo, and I think it's a legitimate target for photographers. There are people who can take, say, better pictures with me with a tiny fraction of the equipment budget. That's certainly true. Once upon a time, that was me, back when I didn't have the equipment budget I currently have.
Right. Yeah. Isn't it funny how that works?
Well, and in fact, no one on earth could afford the equipment that we have today,
Right.
even 10 years ago. A camera of a brand new camera that comes out this year. Canon is about to release some new cameras this year. I think Sony has released some new cameras this year with amazing features in them. But then it's up to you as an artist to figure out if you can make a picture that's worthwhile, because all of the megapixels and the low noise and the high ISO, none of that matters if you can't take a compelling photo.
Amen, brother. Because that's the song that the marketing departments of these companies want you to believe. Like, you have to get this. If you want to shoot pictures like Joe McNally, you got to buy the camera that Joe McNally uses, right?
Well, and so Joe, particularly for the style of photos he does, Joe McNally will outshoot me if he used a phone and I used every piece of equipment I own. Okay.
Absolutely.
Now. That doesn't mean it's a bad idea to have the equipment.
Yeah.
And look at the Olympics. There's some amazing pictures that came out of the Olympics. And some of those, like there's a picture of that Brazilian surfer who looked like he's floating in midair. Now, I don't know exactly what equipment was used for that, but this guy was quite a ways from there. He probably had a 600 millimeter f4 lens. Some huge ass, giant, expensive thing.
Yeah.
And he took a stunning photo with it that would not have been possible without it.
That's right. Yeah.
There are. So the fact that the equipment enables some photos, I don't find I have a problem with that. And when you look at extreme macro, whether it's of snowflakes or of anything else, the equipment can make a great deal of difference.
Yeah.
I use focus stacking, which is a way that you can get around the fact that extreme macro always has very shallow depth of field. That gives you a way of depicting a tiny scene with more of the look of a large scene.
Yeah.
We're used to things. Our eyes are such that we see a lot of the world in focus. Not everything. If I put this, finger up to my eye, it's not in focus. But capturing that for very small things is a look, and that look has a certain impression on the viewer, and that's a legitimate thing. I think for me and others that use that technique to try to do. Did that mean it's better than other techniques? No, because sometimes shallow depth of field can be really beautiful.
Right. It's a tool, right? It's a tool that the artist is using to tell whatever story visually that they're trying to get across. Like, okay, I only want my viewer to focus on this particular part of the flower, so you can abstract the rest out of there. But using, like you say, focus stacking, you have the ability, or even an iPhone these days, right? You have the ability to pick the focus spot, or where you want the viewer to focus on, literally.
Every time technology gives us a new tool like that, people will find creative, awesome ways to use it.
Yes.
And photography has more of that than any other art. Okay, if you're a painter and you paint with either acrylics or oil paints, the oil paints haven't changed in 500 years. There's a few new pigments. We understand archival things a little bit better. Brushes haven't changed at all, man.
Which is amazing.
Now,
amazing.
that means that if that is your art, you master that set of tools, and that may take you a long time to do it. And then you're set, and you don't have to constantly renew and try to apply things in a new way. If you're a photographer, guess what? You're in an area where stuff changes all the time. And that's how we went from having these giant non-portable box cameras to the fabulous cameras that we have today, and that process is continuing.
Yeah. So speaking of the evolution of technologies, one of the other areas that you dabble in is robotics, right? So this is I'm jumping to a different road now outside of photography. So I'll bring it back to photography in a second. But on the robotics side of the equation, since I have you on the hot seat, I have to ask you this question. You've seen, I'm sure you're way more plugged into what's happening in that industry than I am with Tesla and their robot and Boston Robotics, I think it is, or Dynamics, and what they're doing. My question is, I've seen these humanoid robotic devices. I've seen one in person at one of the Tesla dealerships at one of the malls. And my question is, are they real? Like, are we at a point, literally, they're telling us we're going to have these robotic things that can do things humans can do, but we've kind of evolved over millions of years to do things that we can do. Is that replicable in a humanoid form in any meaningful way other than novelty? Right.
Well, it depends on what you're trying to do. For a huge amount of tasks that humans have done for millennia, we use machines now.
Yeah.
Okay. You want to mow the lawn? Get a lawnmower. Okay. It's way easier than going out there with a knife.
Yeah. Scissors. Yeah.
Or scissors. Exactly. So, and each time some machine has come up that has allowed us to do that, people have adjusted to it. When photography was invented, there was a French artist, Eugene Delacroix, that was asked to do a study of photography and asked what it meant. And his first comment was, "From today, painting is dead." Now, fortunately, he was wrong, but he wasn't wrong totally. In that era, the only way you could have a portrait of a loved one is if you had an artist paint it or draw it, which meant most people couldn't afford that. But of the people who could afford it, that was the only way you'd have that thing. If you wanted to commemorate a historic event, some guy had to go out there and paint it or draw it or make an etching. Otherwise, it didn't happen. You couldn't record it. And so if you viewed painting as a way of recording visual information, Delacroix was right. Photography is the way we do that now.
Yeah.
And of course, for lots of things, it isn't just still photography anymore, it's video.
Yeah, of course.
And those displacing that, what it turned out doing is it meant that painting became something that was solely about art and artistic expression. It wasn't about recording what your kids looked like, or so you could have a picture of your mom and dad, or they could have a picture of you. Now, the necessity of that wound up going to photography. And then because it went to photography, it was accessible to everybody. Yeah. So it wasn't just kings and queens that could have pictures of their kids. Today, everybody with a phone has pictures of their kids.
Yep. Many thousands of them. Yeah.
Maybe per day.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
And, the self-portrait is one of the classic subjects in figurative art. There are more selfies taken today than all the self-portraits and all the painters of all of history, right? But that's empowering and enabling. So when you get to robots, Most of these humanoid robots aren't actually good enough at doing things that you'd use them to do a task. They're more of a novelty at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If now the individual things that you might want a robot to do, like, here's an example. If slicing meat is pretty straightforward,
Mm-hmm.
if you go to a fancy sushi place, all of that meat is sliced by hand, and you can watch the guy do it, and he does it right behind the sushi bar and trained for years to do that.
Mm-hmm.
That's a case where we took a general purpose thing called a person, and they trained for maybe a decade
Right.
to learn how to be really good at doing that one thing.
Mm-hmm.
Similarly, for playing a violin, same deal. We take the general purpose human, and then they train. Or look at the Olympics that's going on right now. General purpose humans, ostensibly like you and me, but they do stuff that you and I aren't going to do.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah. They're made from different things. Yeah.
But they put in a ridiculous amount of effort, which is wonderful. I don't mean to, I'm not making fun of it. I'm saying, look at all the effort that goes into making that general purpose thing do those special things. So today, most of our machines that do things for us are very specialized.
Mm-hmm.
So you can cut meat or fish with automated machines in a variety of ways, much better than a person can. They don't really make sushi yet. There's some machine-made sushi. It's way more efficient because it's faster and people are expensive, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it'll take a lot of effort before you can make a general purpose thing that could learn to do everything a human could do better. It will occur, but I don't think that's a plausible scenario in the short term. In the short term, we're going to see increasing automation of things.
Yeah.
Okay, like take the camera's got a lens. The lenses all used to be ground by hand. Very skilled people would be working and grinding it and checking it and grinding it and checking it. And that's why you would develop, like Germany was great in one part of the thing, then Japan got really good, other places are growing. It's hard. It's really hard to have a workforce that is good enough to do that. But today, machines make all our lenses.
Yeah.
And it helps us in lots of ways. One is it means every phone can have an amazingly effective lens, even though it's like this big, or actually just because we wanted to, there's like half a dozen of the damn lenses in cameras. We think of a camera is really 6 cameras.
Yeah, totally.
So I think you're going to see specialization, specialized work are going to take over a lot of things initially than general purpose. Eventually, we'll have general purpose.
So you're telling me, and just by the way, I'm not poo-pooing these robots. I'm just, I want them in what I'm being told to be real, right? Because like the uses that I would have for a humanoid robot are things like go wash the dishes, or go mow the lawn, or go get the ladder out of the garage and run around and change the batteries in the security cameras, or, those kinds of things that I can do myself, but why waste my time if I have this thing that I spent $40,000 on to go ahead and do?
So we'll see how long it takes for people to get things that can do that. I mean, for the dishwashing task, a dishwasher is pretty good. You still have to put the dishes in, and you have to take them out afterwards. But man, the dishwasher works great.
It does.
And that's what I mean by as a perfect example. It's a specialized task. And when you want to do the laundry, those laundry machines and dryers do a pretty damn good job.
But you got to load it, though. You
still have to load it.
That's where the humanoid comes in, loading and sorting the dried laundry and all that.
We'll see what happens. I mean, it's quite possible that you could get that. I mean, for cleaning your house, a Roomba or some robot like that will work.
Yeah.
And it's not going to get up and dust high in the thing, but for running around on the floor, it's probably okay.
Yeah.
So eventually, we probably will have humanoid robots that can do some of those tasks.
Yeah.
But you also have to have a fair amount of intelligence in them. Otherwise, they're, when my kids were little, they always wanted to help me bake cookies. That was their way of asking for cookies, basically.
Of course,
to say if I had even this much more help from them, it'd be impossible. Because they were super enthusiastic, but there was either things I didn't want them to do without me, like run the machine so they could get their fingers caught in them, or there were the things that they just would throw something in when you didn't really want it thrown in quite that way, or whatever. So, if you have a humanoid robot, it also has to understand the task way better or well enough that you can just tell it, "Oh, do this." Right. If you have to explain, okay, now you have to go and pick up the dishes. These are what dishes look like. And you'll find them around the house. Mostly they'll be in the kitchen already or the dining room. But I did take some snacks out to the living room to watch TV. So maybe I left some dishes there.
Yeah.
If you really had to explain all of that every time, it might not be worth it.
So when they launch these things, we're not getting C3PO right away, right?
We are not getting C3PO.
We're getting C1PO.
Well, look, but that's always true with technology. Okay, the first digital cameras sucked compared to the ones today.
Yeah.
Okay, it was like, ooh, 640 by 480. Ooh.
Yeah. I was that guy. I was like, that's amazing.
Me too.
Because everything was 320 by 240 before then.
Exactly. So you think, oh my God, this is so much resolution.
Yeah.
But over time, they will get better. And I think most of the uses of a humanoid robot initially are going to be a novelty. You could have, I could easily see a company having a receptionist that was a robot, because it's kind of weird and cool. People say, oh, wow, there's a robot there. And of course, lots of companies, particularly during and after COVID, they just got rid of their receptionist. And you have to come up and type your name in, and it'll check who you're supposed to see, and it'll print you a little badge. So you can do it without a robot, but a robot might be cool.
Yeah, same with movie theaters, right? Like, when was the last time you went to a movie theater and actually handed somebody money? Right? It doesn't really happen anymore. All this stuff it makes me think, especially the robotics conversation, makes me think of, are we already there in some ways with robotics, not in humanoid form, but, in cars, like the Teslas with self-driving, and it feels like all they have to do is add some sort of large language model in there, and we have basically C3PO on wheels now, right?
Well, the large language models are a huge breakthrough. Self-driving is one that I think we'll see self-driving in a car before we see a humanoid robot driving a regular car. That's because the self-driving car uses lots of cameras and LiDAR and all kinds of things to be able to sense the world around it. And those aren't built into the humanoid robot. And you couldn't build them in the humanoid robot. They got to be up front or behind the car or various other things.
Yeah.
And self-driving is one that people were super enthusiastic about, 5 or even 10 years ago, and we still don't really have them.
Right.
What we have is advanced cruise control. It's still cool. It's still cool.
It is.
Okay. It's still cool. It's an advance, but most of these things take a while. But that's the key thing about technology. As I was saying earlier, the first digital cameras sucked, but they were good enough that people made a second version, a third, and by the time you get now, they're fantastic.
Yeah.
And they're going to keep getting better, by the way.
This is a depressing conversation, and I feel like I was born too early to play with the things that I want to play with. Like, why can't I have it now, man?
Well, Yeah, you're young enough. I think I'm born too early for another reason. I'm getting old.
Yeah, hey, we both are, my friend. We both are. The clock cares for no one. You know what? I'll put you on the spot about this now. So, of all these technologies that we've talked about, I'm going to add another one in there too. Of all the technology we've talked about, you know, the advances in cameras are getting better and better. We've talked about robotics, and you know, there's one more I want to throw in there, and that's VR.
Yep.
Well, actually, two more. VR, if you had to bet on these four technologies, virtual reality in all of its flavors, you know, AR, VR, etc., AI, artificial intelligence in all of its flavors, generative large language models, etc., the robotics industry with specifically humanoid robots that become useful to us, and then lastly, cameras and those iterating to a point that we don't even know what we needed, but now we have it, kind of like going from 320 to, you know, 8K. What would you put your money on? You don't have you have $500,000 to invest. Which of those
okay, but bringing an
technologies?
investment element in is even harder because, you know, the large language model aspect of AI is a business today.
Yeah.
Both, and you have a bunch of trillion-dollar market cap companies that are all competing, and so I think we'll see a lot of progress in that space. It's worth remembering, though, that the large language models, them working as spectacularly as they did, is a brand new thing that the world only figured out, you know, year and a half ago, something like that.
Yeah. Amazing.
But I think that is one where, if you look at Google, Apple, Microsoft, Facebook, Meta, I guess, those are the companies that have a ginormous amount at stake, and they're investing very hard. I bet they're going to make those things work really well. That said, other aspects of self-driving, like self-driving, is an AI thing. The progress there has been much slower recently. And when will we have absolute full self-driving? Well, you do have it today. You can go in some cities and you can get in a self-driving taxi. But it's not something that appears to be as close to rolling out to everyone as the others do. Cameras, of course, are already fabulous, and they're going to keep getting better. And they are going to keep letting us get kinds of photos we couldn't otherwise get. But they're not going to decide anytime soon, oh, that's a great composition. Oh, you should get that thing out of the corner of the frame, take 3 steps over, because that thing in the corner of the frame is distracting you. Okay. Right. And so cameras, I'm very optimistic about, but I don't think there's going to be a giant leap in cameras. I don't know of one that's going to happen soon. You know, the autofocus keeps getting better. Yeah. And I keep missing shots because it didn't get focused, okay?
Yeah.
Now, those are shots that back in the film era I wouldn't even try to take. Now I try to take them, and some of them work out, but I wish it was a higher percentage. So that's one where they can make lots of improvements for a long period of time. What are some of the other ones you brought up? Oh, humanoid robots. Humanoid robots, I think, are going to be a novelty. They might find some application. AR, VR, that's a very interesting case. It's a technology that is waiting for it's an answer searching for a question. Okay,
a cure looking for a disease.
Yeah, it's what is the thing for which that's worth doing. Now, the reason that we have a video industry was originally that a VCR on tape, which is impossibly old and primitive today, but those cost a fortune when they first came out, and they weren't very good. But there were people that wanted them enough to pay that money for them. And that went through a process where they got really cheap. Then that created a rental video market. Then we got DVDs. Then we got, now it's all streaming. But those things, that first version, even though it was really pricey, people would buy.
Yeah.
That's not true for VR. Okay.
Right.
Microsoft has a cool product. Meta has a cool product with Oculus. Apple has a cool product. They're all too expensive, but expensive by itself isn't enough to criticize things because every piece of technology is too expensive on day one. It always is.
Calculators.
Oh my God! My first calculator cost me $500.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, that was like an HP 35 when they first came out. This is dating myself, but currently AR VR doesn't do a task that anybody wants badly enough that the product exists.
Yeah.
Now, I love the gamer market. I'm not a gamer myself, but I have a gamer keyboard because gamers like a really nice crisp feel on the keyboard. So do I.
Yeah.
They wouldn't make those things just for me, but for all the gamers out there, hell yes, they make them. I have one of those big curved screens.
Mm-hmm.
It's fantastic. I love it for Photoshop because I can work on a picture here. I can have another version there. I've got lots of real estate. That thing wouldn't exist if there weren't gamers willing to pay for a big screen. And then probably by this time, it's not just gamers. It's a whole bunch of non-gamers like me that use those big screens.
That's right.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
AR and VR that hasn't started yet.
Yeah.
All of technology is about getting a little snowball to roll down a hill and become this giant avalanche.
Yeah.
And that's one where they keep rolling the snowball and it fizzles out after 10 feet.
Yeah, they've been trying for a while with this, and it hasn't. And I think you hit the nail right on the head. There's no killer app in the VR AR space. Like the killer app for the internet, they say, was email, right? And some degree adult stuff, right? But email was the main driver of, I can actually make money and be more efficient using this thing. It solves a problem I didn't know I had. I'm all in, right? You can't make that statement right now about anything AR, VR related. It's entertainment. It's passive.
Yes.
It's take it or leave it right now.
But people tried. You mentioned earlier the Palm Pilot. Well, take the Palm Pilot or the Sharp Wizard or the Apple Newton or a whole variety of other
Treo, Palm Treo. Yeah.
Those things were trying to be the smartphones we have today.
Yeah.
They didn't have network connectivity. They didn't have lots of things. They still sold a bit.
Yeah.
But
billions.
But they billions, but not like the cell phone business.
No.
There's a magic set of features you needed for that to really take off. And that magic set hasn't occurred for AR and VR yet. Yeah. And I think it plausibly will, because we like 3D stuff. We like immersive experiences in general. If you think about travel or if you think about theme park rides, we spend a lot of money to put ourselves in an immersive experience where we're shooting down a roller coaster. Those are the things where the overall experience is very valuable to us, and AR, VR will be able to give us some fraction of that anyway.
Yeah.
They haven't connected yet.
I wonder, maybe this is a question that we can sort of wrap it up on. What I'm hearing from you is you're plugged in. You're a futurist, whether you like it or not. You can kind of predict where things are going based on where things have been. So you've been around long enough, like a lot of us, some more than others. But when I think about this stuff, and I'm really curious to get your opinion on this. When I think about this stuff or these different disparate technologies, I wonder if we're heading towards a killer app that needs to happen when convergence happens. Like, okay, now we have these humanoid robots that are almost there autonomously, but when you put on your VR headset, you can become that robot and control it remotely and have it go do things in the real world that you are unable or unwilling to do, including driving a car.
Example. There's a set of science fiction novels that had this idea of remote work by people controlling things remotely.
Oh, what's the name of that? I need that. Or tell me later, and we'll put it in the show notes.
I'll tell you later.
Okay.
I'll look it up.
Yep.
They had a name in the ones that I remember. They called them Waldos. A Waldo was the name of the equipment you would use, and some of that equipment exists today, but it's not really used remotely. But look at what the pandemic, which is, of course, was a terrible thing, but look what it did for video communication. We had video communication for the longest time before then. It was even free if you did Skype or a variety of other platforms. It wasn't used anything like what happened when the pandemic was a forcing function that made people do it. And then once you do it, you get into it.
Yeah.
And
it
then
makes life easier
anymore. It makes life easier. So that was one. It's a killer app, but technologically, it could have happened 5 years sooner. You could make video calls. They weren't expensive. There was another period, if you go back, 20 years, well, then yes, you could make them, but they were expensive. But that was one where society we were stuck in the ruts that we were in, that some things should be in person, some things should be on the phone. Video was this weird thing very few people used. Companies would use it, but they'd have to kind of twist people's arms and say, no, you've got to use this because we have to coordinate with the factory that's on the other side of the country, and so this is how we're going to do it. But now, it's usually popular. Now, if you tried to take it away, there'd be a revolt.
Yeah. I mean, entire businesses have been formed around using remote communication as the main, along with other software as a service. But
we did all that, and we still just talk.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe for some of the things I could grab the mouse and point at something if we were looking at a screen, but we don't have a way to do remote surgery. We don't have a way to do remote almost anything other than just talk. Yeah. And I think that's one that would potentially be very important. Yeah. I mean, weirdly, the one set of people who do that are drone operators.
Right.
I mean, there's I met someone who is a drone pilot. The person was originally a fighter pilot for the Air Force. Then he became a drone pilot. And I said, how do you like it? He says, okay, it's weird. I'm conducting operations on the other side of the earth. But it's kind of like a 9-to-5 job, but I still get to fly. Yeah. And for him, he said, look, I'm 45. They wouldn't let me in a jet.
Yeah, that's amazing.
But I get to fly there. And so that's one where there are, now that's in a very specific military context. And it's probably only the military is doing drones that far. Like I've got a drone for photography. Lots of people do.
Sure.
Yeah, okay, that's remote, but I can see it. But that's one where, okay, that's been abstracted away.
Yeah, yeah.
And I don't see why we don't use that for more things, but it'll be some combination of people developing the right technology, having the right sets of controls that you can do, and getting the right feedback to you.
Yeah. What do you think the forcing function is for AR VR, or will there be a forcing function to push it into the mainstream, or is it is it forever going to be a novelty?
Well, it's human cleverness. I don't know what the final application would be. There are people who would say, people have tried lots of things. You'll say, well, what if you're a surgeon? And if you're a surgeon, you want to have lots of information overlaid on, you see this bones and organs that you're cutting. You want to see lots of other stuff, at the same time, the heart rate and all the other stuff. And yeah, it's on monitors in there and there's people talking to you, but wouldn't it be great if you could see it and be like a heads up display?
Yeah.
People have tried that. Some of the folks seem to like it. There was a VR project from a Seattle area startup many years ago that I went to go see, and they had something like this for mechanics at airplane mechanics. so that they could call up the manual page in their little glasses while they're working on the airplane. It was
like
cool.
Tony Stark building the Iron Man suit.
Exactly.
Right?
Well, so that's the other funny thing is you see that in this sort of thing does occur in lots of sci-fi movies.
Yeah.
But so far, it just hasn't quite connected. And I don't know what the answer will be. It could be it'll be a new, someone will make a game that is so compelling, but if it's done VR, and that coincides with great, maybe a lot less expensive than today's VR equipment coming out. That might be a thing that would
or entertainment, right? I always wondered when Apple, for example, launched their Vision Pro headset, as connected as Apple is to the entertainment industry. I mean, they've got Apple TVs all over the place, for God's sake. Why it seemed like a missed opportunity for them not to do some big launch event with someone like a Taylor Swift or someone like that, where it's exclusively available in the virtual world, and you got to have a headset in order to see it, right? Or you could see a substandard version of it in 2D on your TV, but if you really want the experience of being there, you got to use the Vision Pro headset.
So you have just come up with a great recipe.
Yeah.
And I don't know why they didn't. I don't have any inside information. I know that people have tried to do things like that in the past, and some of them have failed for a funny reasons, a little bit like the photography stuff we've been talking about.
Yeah.
It's because the technology was there, but they didn't have the artistic element to it that would really make it compelling.
Right. Right.
You know, if you just take a movie and you put it on VR, that's not quite the same thing. And yet in a movie, one of the things that's powerful that brings us in is all of the framing and the cuts, the editing. All of that stuff is very important to how we experience it. If you just let us wander around a virtual set like we were there right beside Iron Man and the others, we might miss the best dialogue.
Yeah, because you're like looking at this little tool and wondering what that does while they're talking
exactly.
about.
Like, oh, look at this cool little
coming.
detail. Meanwhile, oh shit, the guy snapped his fingers and half everybody's dead.
But a more passive thing, like the Olympics, for example. You know, my family's really into gymnastics, so wouldn't it have been cool to be able to put on an Apple Vision Pro headset and sit right next to the beam while Simone Biles is doing her thing? We would have paid a lot of money to be there. We can't fly over there, but we could be there virtually and have kind of the experience. That seems like a missed opportunity.
I agree, but that said, you'd have to get the permission to go do it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It would have to be,
It would be, but then you'd also kind of like to say, and can't we have a Simone cam that's strapped to her so we get to see? But then that makes her hard, and if she fell because she had the Simone cam strapped to her, it'd be a problem. Plus, I don't know. I think I'd get motion sick doing all those spins up in the air.
I just want to sit on the sidelines with the perfect seat, better than the celebrities have, and get that perspective.
I agree. That's the kind of idea that might work.
Yeah, it would take a $1 trillion company to pull that off. Who could do that?
Well, no. Let me say, a $1 trillion company might finance it, and they might decide that it's worth financing, and I think it would be. They would have to find some brilliant cinematographer, director, VR, impresario, who would figure out what works and what doesn't. Where do we put the cameras? How do we edit and switch points of view?
Yeah.
Maybe there's some user interface that you also have to do in there.
Yeah, all possible.
All possible, but it requires a lot of creative input. So
or you could drop a couple of $1 billion on a group, just form a new group inside of Apple. That's all they do is VR events, right?
Kodak made motion picture film back in the day.
Yeah.
Kodak made
zero. Kodak.
Yeah. They made 0 movies.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Today, AriaFlex, Red, companies like that make the high-end cameras. They make zero movies.
This is true.
To make a movie, you need really talented people that understand the tools. And for a new thing like VR, that really have gotten and dug into it deep enough that they can do something super compelling. Yeah. And so I think that's the problem is, yeah, you have trillion-dollar companies that are building these things, multiple of them.
Yeah.
The world hasn't found connected with this right thing because they just don't have the combination of the opportunity, which, yes, a trillion-dollar company can provide the opportunity by funding it.
Yeah.
But you also need the creative impact and the right thing to watch. I mean,
a lot of
you mentioned Simone Biles and Taylor Swift. Those are great examples of superstars in their own fields who absolutely would bring thousands of people with them if someone created this content.
Yeah.
But nobody has.
Yeah, maybe there's a company that's doing this and I'm just ignorant to the fact that it feels like there needs to be some high-end studio level company like Paramount, whatever, that specializes in this new kind of media, and they go to and offer their services to like political rallies, so you can be in the front seat, or Olympics or product launches, or, all these things.
Sure, but then you have the chicken and the egg. So,
well, yeah. So it wouldn't make money for a decade or so.
Well, but you have the imagination to have come up with this idea and to have suggested it for several things: politics, live entertainment, sports.
Yep.
I agree. That's great. But unfortunately, for someone saying, well, how big is the VR market for sports today? It's zero.
Right.
And lots of the people who would be your early adopter customers who would just love to go do that don't know it's even possible.
Right. So there's a whole education campaign that would need to happen.
So
all of that.
The same thing is true for high-tech stuff in all other high-tech stuff in movies, like, Avatar and making these 10-foot tall blue people out of regular actors with all of this computer graphics, but the thing looks so real. And that took a huge amount of effort by Jim Cameron and a ton of technology that in companies that supported his effort, and a lot of learning on the part of the actors. Andy Serkis, the guy who played Gollum.
And Planet of the Apes and all that. Yeah.
Once he got good at it, that's the best guy in the world at being emotive and expressive, because it's hard enough for someone to learn how to act. Learning how to act in this other context when you're sitting there with stuff painted on your face.
Right.
That's hard.
But it's new, right? And that's what people like you and I,
time,
wasn't done before. Wasn't done.
It will happen, but there's some set of little miracles that will have to occur before that happens.
Yeah.
And in retrospect, there'll be a podcast like this 5 years, 10 years from now, I don't know when, where someone will say, oh, yes, well, it was very easy to predict. It was as soon as someone did Taylor Swift vision for VR, suddenly everything opened up. But now, sitting up front, before that's occurred, it's very hard to say what those things are. And I tell you, a lot of people have spent a lot of money and a lot of time, and a lot of smart creatives have tried to make this work.
Yeah.
So far, and it hasn't.
Yeah.
And so then that dissuades people who say, okay, look, which hill am I going to go die on? Am I going to go make super cool movies that everyone loves that are in regular theaters and regular TV? Or am I going to be the person who pioneers a VR movie? Well, between the two, if you're really good at it, you have to have some specific passion. Otherwise, It's like, yeah, why don't you go make, the next version of an MCU movie or something?
Right. You want to make history or you want to make money, right? You gotta do that equation. But as a CTO, as an ex-CTO at Microsoft, you got to recognize and appreciate that we don't know where we're going until we kind of get there. I mean, there's always a new piece of the puzzle that gets revealed. Like you said, 18 months ago, we didn't know about this Chat GPT stuff, and now Microsoft is in bed with OpenAI and Meta's in it, and all these different companies are building on that. We didn't have these capabilities, and that's affected me at a podcasting level as well. I use the tools for making my efficiency more efficient, in building the podcast. But I wonder if these technologies, as they evolve, each new star creates a new sort of gravity out there that changes the equation of our little solar system.
Oh, for sure.
Right?
Technology. Part of the reason that technology moves quickly is there are millions of people out there who experience it every day. It's not something that's just kept for the few. Anybody can get a digital camera. At least anybody in the developed world, and a whole lot of people, a growing number in the developing world. I don't want to forget them, but there's enormous access. And so then when people have new good ideas, we also can get them out to everyone. So, TikTok and YouTube and other internet distribution things have allowed all kinds of cool stuff to bubble up.
For sure. Yeah.
But that isn't an answer for everything, because what you're limited to doing in a TikTok is what will stream, and that's a short thing and with regular video. If you made a VR version, it wouldn't work. I think that the more people come up with new good ideas, the easier it is for other people to come up with other good ideas.
Stand on the shoulders of giants.
Absolutely. Right? That's what it's all about. And so, you and I both may have been born too early, but people are going to be able to keep saying that going forward.
Yeah.
And I think that is a reason to be optimistic.
Or were we, Nathan? Were we born too early? Because maybe we were born just within the window of time that they'll be able to recreate our brains as a LLM that will live on forever.
Well, there's a chance
show
they
up
will.
in VR.
There's a chance we will. But I think my kids have a more likely chance of that. I think grandkids, which we don't have yet, but grandkids would be even more likely to have that occur. But anyway, I think from a technological perspective, particularly if you're a creative person that likes deploying technology in audio or video or VR or photography, it's a great time to be alive, and I think it's only getting better.
I love it. Well, I'll leave you with a final word on since we're talking about future-facing stuff. What's in the future for you? Like what keeps you up at night? I know there's got to be some one thing that you're obsessing over right now. So
no, there's always more than one thing I obsess over.
What's your current obsession?
This winter I'm going to go off and take more Snowflake photos. We've got some upgrades to the Snowflake system. So that will be exciting. I'm working on a book on pastries, so we're photographing lots of cakes and pastries, and we're going to come up with some new innovative things to do with that.
Yeah.
I've got a crazy project to try to photograph every species of wild cat and wild dog in the world.
Oh, very nice. Okay.
There's like 30 cats and 40 dogs, roughly, in terms of species. Mm-hmm. And some of them are super rare and super hard to get, so I probably won't get them, but I'm going to try.
That's so cool. That's so cool. Yeah, and that's the forcing function. And when you go out there and try to get that elusive one, you may have another idea for something else, right?
Yeah, this is also partly what happens when you're cooped up for 2 years because of the pandemic. You're not traveling. And it's like, hey, let me pick a project that is all about traveling.
Amen.
I also like it because I do lots of studio photography, And in studio photography, you control everything. And don't complain about the light. You supplied the light.
It's your fault.
Exactly. And for food photography, which I do a lot of, you don't have to sneak up on a cake. It just kind of sits there. Whereas the wildlife stuff, particularly for these rare wild animals, you don't control anything. The light is what it is. If they're afraid of you, maybe all you see is their butt as they run away, or maybe you don't see them at all because they saw you coming and they said, "I don't want any part of this stuff."
The hunt.
So it's a very different thing, but it's kind of cool.
That's so cool. Nathan, thank you so much. There's so much I wanted to cover. Like I wanted to dive into the culinary stuff, but you have to come on again. We have to do another conversation where we dive in and catch up on what's current. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming on. What's a URL where people can point their browsers to right now to continue learning about the stuff that you're working on?
Modernistcuisine.com.
Modernistcuisine.com. All right.
Or modernistcuisinegallery.com.
Okay. And I'll link to both of those in the show notes.
Okay, great.
Very cool, my friend. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.
Okay, bye.